Good evening, listeners, and welcome back to another tale from the golden age of radio mystery. Tonight, we bring you a story that unfolded in the autumn of 1947, when the leaves were turning crimson in Central Park, and the air carried that peculiar chill that makes even the bravest souls pull their collars a little tighter. This is the story of Dr. Margaret Whitmore, a brilliant cardiologist whose own heart would prove far more fragile than any she'd ever tried to heal.
Dr. Whitmore worked at Manhattan General Hospital, where her reputation preceded her like morning fog rolling off the Hudson River. Colleagues whispered that she could diagnose a heart condition simply by listening to a patient's voice over the telephone. Her hands were steady as a surgeon's, her mind sharp as a winter morning, and her dedication to healing bordered on the obsessive. But on that particular Tuesday evening in October, as she made her final rounds through the cardiac ward, she had no idea that her own heart was about to become the center of a mystery that would baffle even the finest detectives in New York City.
The hospital corridors echoed with the familiar sounds of evening shift change. Nurses padded softly between rooms, their white shoes whispering against the polished linoleum. Dr. Whitmore paused outside room 314, where her most puzzling patient lay recovering from what should have been routine surgery. Thomas Brennan, a 42-year-old insurance investigator, had come to her 3 weeks earlier, complaining of chest pains and irregular heartbeat. The initial examination revealed nothing unusual, but something in his eyes had troubled her, a fear that seemed to go deeper than concern for his health.
Now, as she reviewed his chart one final time, Dr. Whitmore noticed something that made her blood run cold. The medication dosages recorded for Mr. Brennan didn't match what she had prescribed. Someone had been altering his treatment, increasing certain drugs while decreasing others, in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. She checked and double-checked the entries, her trained eye catching discrepancies that others might have missed. The handwriting was careful, professional, designed to look like standard medical notation. But Dr. Whitmore knew every doctor's handwriting in the hospital, and this belonged to none of them.
She decided to confront the night nurse, a stern woman named Florence Hartley, who had worked the cardiac ward for 15 years. Nurse Hartley was known for her meticulous attention to detail and her unwavering devotion to her patients. When Dr. Whitmore approached her at the nurse's station, clipboard in hand, she fully expected a reasonable explanation for the discrepancies. What she got instead was a look of genuine confusion that seemed to pierce right through her professional composure.
"Doctor," Nurse Hartley said, adjusting her starched white cap, "I've been following your orders to the letter. Every medication, every dosage, exactly as you prescribed. If there are changes in Mr. Brennan's chart, they didn't come from me." Her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the kind that comes from years of routine so ingrained it becomes second nature. But as she spoke, Dr. Whitmore noticed something else. Her hands were trembling slightly, just barely enough to be perceptible to someone trained to notice the subtle signs of distress.
That night, Dr. Whitmore made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going home to her quiet apartment on the Upper West Side, she decided to stay at the hospital and keep watch over room 314. She settled into the small office adjacent to the cardiac ward, positioning herself where she could observe the comings and goings in the corridor. The hospital after midnight was a different world entirely, quieter, more mysterious, filled with shadows that seemed to move with purposes of their own.
Around 2 in the morning, she saw a figure moving stealthily down the corridor. It wasn't one of the night staff. She knew them all by sight. This person wore the standard hospital scrubs, but something about their movement seemed wrong. Too careful, too deliberate, like someone trying very hard not to be noticed. The figure paused outside room 314, glanced quickly in both directions, and then slipped inside. Dr. Whitmore felt her heart begin to race when she realized she was witnessing something that could very well be attempted murder.
She waited exactly 3 minutes, long enough for the intruder to believe they were safe, but not long enough for any real harm to come to Mr. Brennan. Then she stood up, her chair creaking softly in the quiet office, and made her way toward room 314. Each step seemed to echo in the empty corridor despite her efforts to move silently. When she reached the doorway, she peered carefully around the frame and saw something that made her gasp involuntarily.
The figure was bent over Mr. Brennan's IV stand, carefully adjusting something with practiced precision. In the dim light filtering through the room's single window, Dr. Whitmore could see that this was no random intruder or confused hospital worker. This person knew exactly what they were doing, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this before. They wore surgical gloves and a mask, but their movements betrayed a familiarity with medical procedures that suggested professional training.
Dr. Whitmore stepped into the room, her voice cutting through the silence like a surgical blade. "Stop what you're doing and step away from that patient." The figure froze, and for a moment that seemed to stretch like taffy, neither person moved. Then slowly, deliberately, the intruder turned around, and Dr. Whitmore found herself face to face with someone she had never expected to see in her hospital corridors at 2 in the morning.
It was Dr. Richard Caldwell, a respected physician from St. Mary's Hospital across town. Dr. Whitmore had known him for years. They had attended medical conferences together, shared professional conversations at various social gatherings. He was known for his brilliant research into cardiac medications and his innovative treatment approaches. But now, standing in the darkened hospital room, with his hands still positioned near the IV equipment, he looked like a man caught in the grip of some terrible compulsion.
"Richard," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beeping of Mr. Brennan's heart monitor. "What are you doing here? What have you done to my patient?" Dr. Caldwell's eyes, visible above his surgical mask, held a mixture of shame and desperation that she had never seen before. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and the only sounds in the room were the mechanical rhythms of the medical equipment and their own labored breathing.
Finally, Dr. Caldwell pulled down his mask, revealing a face aged beyond his years by worry and sleepless nights. "Margaret," he said, and his voice carried a weight of sorrow that seemed to fill the entire room. "You don't understand. You couldn't possibly understand. Thomas Brennan isn't just another patient. He's the insurance investigator who's been looking into my research, my funding, everything I've worked for over the past 5 years."
The pieces began to fall into place in Dr. Whitmore's mind like dominoes toppling in a predetermined pattern. She remembered reading about irregularities in medical research funding, whispers of doctors falsifying data to secure grants, rumors of pharmaceutical companies paying physicians to promote certain drugs regardless of their effectiveness. "Your cardiac research," she said slowly, "the breakthrough treatments you've been developing, they don't work, do they?" Dr. Caldwell's shoulders sagged as if he were carrying the weight of the entire hospital on his back. "Worse than that, Margaret. They're actively harmful. The medication I've been promoting, the treatment protocol I've published in 3 major medical journals, it's killing people. Not quickly, not obviously, but slowly, systematically, weakening their hearts until they simply stop." His confession hung in the air between them like a poisonous cloud, contaminating everything it touched.
"And Thomas Brennan discovered this," Dr. Whitmore said, the full horror of the situation becoming clear to her trained mind. She remembered reading about irregularities in medical research funding, whispers of doctors falsifying data to secure grants, rumors of pharmaceutical companies paying physicians to promote certain drugs regardless of their effectiveness. "Your cardiac research," she said slowly. "The breakthrough treatments you've been developing. They don't work, do they?" Dr. Caldwell's shoulders sagged, as if he were carrying the weight of the entire hospital on his back. "Worse than that, Margaret. They're actively harmful. The medication I've been promoting, the treatment protocol I've published in 3 major medical journals, it's killing people. Not quickly, not obviously, but slowly, systematically, weakening their hearts until they simply stop." His confession hung in the air between them like a poisonous cloud, contaminating everything it touched.
And Thomas Brennan discovered this, Dr. Whitmore said, the full horror of the situation becoming clear to her trained mind. He was investigating insurance claims, unusual patterns of cardiac deaths, and the trail led back to your research? She glanced at the sleeping patient, seeing him now not just as another case, but as a man whose dedication to uncovering the truth had nearly cost him his life.
Dr. Caldwell nodded miserably, his professional composure crumbling like ancient paper exposed to flame. "He came to me 2 months ago with questions about my funding sources, about the pharmaceutical company that's been backing my research. I thought I could convince him to drop the investigation, maybe offer him some kind of compensation for his troubles. But Thomas Brennan turned out to be a man of uncommon integrity."
"So you decided to silence him permanently," she said, her voice carrying both accusation and profound sadness. She had known Richard Caldwell as a colleague and respected his work. Discovering his capacity for such calculated evil felt like learning that gravity no longer held objects to the earth. You arranged for him to become your patient, knowing that you could manipulate his treatment from the inside.
"I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. But even as he spoke the words, they both knew how hollow they sounded. "At first, I just wanted to discredit him, make him appear unreliable, perhaps a little unstable. A man with serious health problems, you understand, might not be considered the most credible witness. But then he kept digging, kept asking questions, kept getting closer to the truth."
Dr. Whitmore found herself thinking about all the patients who might have been treated with Dr. Caldwell's protocols, all the families who had lost loved ones to what they believed was simply the cruel randomness of heart disease. How many people have died because of your research, Richard? How many families have buried their mothers and fathers and children because you were too proud or too greedy to admit your mistakes?
The questions seemed to strike Dr. Caldwell like a physical blow. He leaned against the wall, his face pale in the dim hospital lighting, and for a moment, Dr. Whitmore thought he might collapse entirely. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I've tried not to count, tried not to think about it. The pharmaceutical company, they kept pushing for more data, more proof that the treatment was effective. They were paying me more money than I'd ever dreamed of having."
At that moment, Thomas Brennan stirred in his hospital bed, his eyes fluttering open as consciousness returned. He looked first at Dr. Whitmore, then at Dr. Caldwell, and his expression immediately sharpened with recognition and understanding. "Dr. Caldwell," he said, his voice hoarse but determined, "I should have known you'd try something like this. Even flat on my back in a hospital bed, I'm still too dangerous for you to leave alone."
Dr. Whitmore moved quickly to Mr. Brennan's side, checking his pulse and examining the IV equipment that Dr. Caldwell had been tampering with. "What did you give him?" she demanded, her professional training overriding her shock at the situation. "What medication did you add to his IV?" But Dr. Caldwell seemed to have retreated into himself, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else entirely.
Thomas Brennan struggled to sit up in his hospital bed, his investigator's instincts clearly overcoming his physical weakness.
"Dr. Whitmore," he said urgently, "you need to contact the police immediately, and the medical board. Dr. Caldwell's research has been linked to at least 47 suspicious cardiac deaths across 5 states. I have documentation in a safety deposit box at First National Bank on Lexington Avenue."
The confession that followed was unlike anything Dr. Whitmore had ever witnessed in her years of medical practice. Dr. Caldwell seemed to deflate like a punctured balloon, and the words poured out of him as if a dam had burst somewhere deep in his soul. He told them about the pharmaceutical company that had approached him 5 years earlier, promising unlimited research funding in exchange for positive results. He described how he had initially believed in the treatment, how the early results had seemed promising, how easy it had been to ignore the warning signs when the money kept flowing.
He talked about falsifying data, bribing hospital administrators to overlook irregularities, and even paying off medical journal editors to publish his fraudulent research without proper peer review. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity and terrifying in its implications. Dr. Whitmore found herself wondering how many other researchers might be involved in similar schemes, how many patients might be receiving treatments that were not only ineffective, but actively harmful.
When Dr. Caldwell finally finished his confession, the room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of the heart monitor attached to Thomas Brennan. Dr. Whitmore looked at both men, one a criminal whose actions had cost countless lives, the other a dedicated investigator who had nearly paid the ultimate price for his pursuit of truth. The contrast between them seemed to embody everything that was both noble and corrupt about the healing profession.
The arrival of the police was almost anticlimactic after the emotional intensity of Dr. Caldwell's confession. 2 detectives from the local precinct took him into custody, reading him his rights in the flat, professional tones that police use when dealing with serious crimes. As they led him away in handcuffs, Dr. Caldwell turned back to Dr. Whitmore one final time, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding or forgiveness that she was not prepared to offer.
In the days that followed, the medical community was rocked by revelations about the extent of Dr. Caldwell's fraudulent research. The pharmaceutical company that had funded his work was investigated by federal authorities. Several hospital administrators were arrested for accepting bribes, and medical journals across the country began implementing stricter review procedures for research submissions. Dr. Whitmore found herself testifying before grand juries and medical review boards, helping to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy.
Thomas Brennan recovered fully from his ordeal, though he would later say that the experience had taught him never to underestimate the lengths to which desperate people will go to protect their secrets. His investigation ultimately led to criminal charges against 17 individuals and civil lawsuits totaling more than $50 million. The families of patients who had died as a result of Dr. Caldwell's treatments finally had answers to questions that had haunted them for years.
But for Dr. Whitmore, the most lasting impact of that night was not the legal proceedings or the media attention that followed. It was the realization that the trust between doctor and patient, which she had always considered sacred and inviolable, was far more fragile than she had ever imagined. She began to question not just Dr. Caldwell's research, but her own assumptions about the medical profession and the systems designed to protect patients from harm.
She instituted new protocols in her own practice, double-checking medication orders, requiring second opinions for unusual treatments, and maintaining meticulous documentation of every decision and its justification. Her colleagues initially found her new procedures excessive, but as news of the Caldwell scandal spread throughout the medical community, more and more doctors began adopting similar safeguards.
The pharmaceutical company involved in the conspiracy was eventually forced to pay damages totaling over $200 million and agreed to submit to ongoing federal oversight of their research activities. Several of their executives received prison sentences, and the company's stock price plummeted as investors lost confidence in their ability to develop legitimate treatments. The industry as a whole began implementing stricter standards for research validation and data verification.
Dr. Caldwell himself received a sentence of 15 years in federal prison, though he would serve only 8 before being granted parole for good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations. His medical license was permanently revoked, and he was banned from any involvement in pharmaceutical research or patient care. Some said the punishment was too lenient given the scope of his crimes. Others argued that destroying his career and reputation was punishment enough.
Thomas Brennan returned to his work as an insurance investigator with renewed dedication to uncovering fraud and protecting innocent victims. He often spoke about the night in the hospital as a turning point in his understanding of how corruption could flourish even in institutions dedicated to healing and helping others. His investigation techniques became more sophisticated, his instincts more finely tuned to the subtle signs of deception and cover-up.
Years later, Dr. Whitmore would reflect on how that autumn night had changed not just her approach to medicine, but her understanding of human nature itself. She had always believed that people entered the medical profession out of genuine desire to heal and help others. The discovery that someone could systematically harm patients for financial gain challenged her most fundamental assumptions about the motivations that drive human behavior.
Yet she also found reasons for hope in the aftermath of the scandal, the medical community's response to the revelations, the immediate implementation of new safeguards, the willingness to acknowledge systemic problems, the commitment to preventing similar tragedies in the future, demonstrated that the profession's ethical foundation, while damaged, was not destroyed. Good doctors like herself were determined to restore trust through transparency and accountability.
The case became a landmark in medical ethics education, studied in medical schools across the country as an example of how professional pressures and financial incentives can corrupt even well-intentioned practitioners. Dr. Whitmore herself became a frequent lecturer on medical ethics, sharing her experience as a cautionary tale about the importance of maintaining professional integrity even under difficult circumstances.
She never forgot the look in Dr. Caldwell's eyes that night in room 314, the mixture of shame, desperation, and self-loathing that she had witnessed in his final moments of deception. It reminded her that the line between healing and harm, between professional success and ethical failure, was often thinner than anyone cared to admit. The heart, she learned, could be malignant in ways that had nothing to do with medical pathology.
Thomas Brennan and Dr. Whitmore maintained a friendship that lasted for many years after that night. He would often visit her at the hospital, not as a patient, but as someone who understood the weight of responsibility that came with protecting others from harm. They shared a bond forged in crisis, a mutual respect born from their shared commitment to truth and justice, even when the personal cost was high.
On quiet evenings, when the hospital corridors echoed with the familiar sounds of healing and hope, Dr. Whitmore would sometimes pause outside room 314 and remember that night when evil had walked those halls disguised as medicine. She would think about all the patients sleeping peacefully in their beds, trusting that the people caring for them had their best interests at heart. It was a trust she was determined never to betray.
The story of Dr. Margaret Whitmore, Thomas Brennan, and Richard Caldwell serves as a reminder that the greatest threats to our well-being sometimes come not from obvious enemies, but from those we trust most completely. In hospitals and clinics across the country, dedicated healthcare professionals work tirelessly to preserve life and restore health. But vigilance, accountability, and unwavering commitment to ethical principles remain the only reliable safeguards against those who would exploit that trust for personal gain.
And so ends our tale of the Malignant Heart, a story of betrayal and redemption, of corruption and courage, set against the backdrop of a profession dedicated to healing. In that autumn of 1947, when the leaves turned crimson and the air carried winter's promise, 3 people learned that the human heart, whether healthy or diseased, remains the most complex and unpredictable organ of all. Sometimes its malignancy has nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with the choices we make when we think no one is watching.
Thank you for joining us for this evening's mystery from the golden age of radio drama. Until next time, remember that in the shadows of even the most trusted institutions, truth and justice depend on the courage of individuals willing to stand up for what is right, no matter the personal cost. Good night, listeners, and sleep well.
Good night.